exploring some of the early history of the seat of our county, Urbana. So, I'm sure a lot of people were talking a little bit about the picture that you see here today. Just to give a little reference, this is at the intersection, standing in the middle of the street of Main Street and Broadway, which was originally called Market Street, looking west. So a couple of buildings that you might recognize that are still there today. Here on the left, this white building here is the longtime home of the beloved Crane Alley and is now the Encanto restaurant. And you've got the Princess Theater here as well. But most of downtown Urbana has changed quite a bit over the course of its history, and we'll cover some of that today. But before we start talking about some of the historic buildings in the community, let's instead start by taking just a little bit of a look at the history of how Urbana came to be. Before Champaign County even existed, this area was initially a part of Vermilion County. Residents of the small communities that had begun to spring up around the large groves of trees began to advocate for splitting off from Vermilion County to establish their own local governance beginning in the early 1830s. They were successful in 1833 when State Senator John Vance sponsored a bill to establish the new county. It was named in honor of Vance's childhood home, Urbana, Ohio, located in Champaign County, Ohio. The site of the new county seat was decided at the south end of the big grove of trees, which is now Busey Woods, and you can still see just a little bit of the remnants of those trees situated here on our Bowman map, which was made in 1858. It was selected primarily due to its higher elevation, and it was less prone to flooding during the rainy seasons, and also because of its closeness to the Boneyard Creek, which was a well-known source of water at that time. The first white residents of the area were Runner Fielder, William Tompkins, and Gabbert and David Newcomb. Tompkins specifically settled in 1828, building his cabin just south of the Big Grove, whose only remnants now, like I said, are Busey Woods. Tompkins' cabin was located where Courier Cafe is located today. So if you're looking at the map, Race Street is right here, and so his cabin would have been located right about here. Shortly after Tompkins built his cabin, more families started to move into the area, and Tompkins only stuck in Champaign County for a short period of time before continuing out west. In his cabin, a new local community member moved in who would become incredibly influential by the name of Isaac Busey. More on him shortly. The first tavern and store opened up a year after the establishment of the new community of Urbana in 1834. The tavern was just a simple log structure built by Israel Knapp at the intersection of Main and Market Streets, which would be located here. And of course now Market Street is now known as Broadway. Isaac Alexander of Danville then brought the first stock of goods to Urbana shortly after and opened a general goods store on Main Street. Reverend Arthur Bradshaw of the Methodist Episcopal Church became the area's first preacher and then built the first brick house in the community in 1841. The railroad, of course, was equally important to the growth of Urbana as it was to Champaign. When the Illinois Central came to the new community of West Urbana in 1854, the city of Urbana utilized streetcars to transport residents and travelers from the Champaign County Courthouse to the depot. About a decade later, Urbana would receive its own railroad, the Indianapolis, Bloomington, and Western, which is seen here further to the north. The depot was built at the north end of the community at the time and then grew its presence by constructing a rail yard to the east of town in the 1870s. The railway led to the expansion of industry and business in the community. However, with the establishment of the University of Illinois in 1867, it would solidify the community of Urbana as a cultural hub on the east side of the state. We know so much of this community's history, thanks primarily due to the dedicated work of Judge Joseph Cunningham. Aside from his professional work, Cunningham contributed significantly to journalism in Urbana, collecting newspapers and writing histories of his community. After his death, he donated his entire library and personal collection to the City Library in Urbana. And here's a picture of a couple of the more historic homes that were built during this time frame before 1878. This was taken from one of the first encyclopedias made of Champaign County. You'll see the home of Judge Cunningham in all of its extravagance, as well as a few more stately homes such as the Pence home, who helped build one of the first larger brick community buildings and business spaces in downtown Urbana, the Spence Block, as well as one of the cottages of one of the local doctors. Now that we've discuss some of the community's early history, let's start taking a look at some of its historic buildings, and what better place to start than at the Champaign County Courthouse, which begins with a rather fun, tall tale. The courthouse was originally planned to be platted further north than where it stands today, around the area of Crystal Lake Park. Isaac Busey, after purchasing Tompkins Cabin, became the largest landowner in Champaign County and would use his growing wealth to increase his status and influence in the local community. The legend goes that the state commissioners sent to plat the ground for the new county courthouse arrived late in the day due to bad weather, and so they ended up staying in the home of Isaac Busey, whether by sheer coincidence or by very much Isaac's intent. Now, aside from his landowning and business prowess, Isaac had become known for one other hobby at the time, his ale, which was referenced as white lightning in histories at the time. It continues that Busey got these commissioners rather drunk that night, and they stumbled out of his cabin the following morning and only made it about a block away from his home before driving in the stake for the courthouse. Ike and his wife then graciously donated land for the Champaign County Courthouse to be built, and then immediately welcomed in considerable profits from the surrounding land, which they also just happened to own, as businesses began to spring up in the area. The first courthouse was a simple log structure built as a temporary home for early trials in the county and had no jail. So while the buildings were being constructed, trials were held in private businesses and homes, including the home of Isaac Busey. In 1836, the community welcomed its first county jail, which was also just a simple wood log building, looking much like this. It was built by Colonel Matthew Busey for $850 and was 2 stories tall with the only access doors on the second floor. Prisoners would be lowered from the second floor through a trapdoor to the ground level, which featured just a few barred windows and a full dirt floor. This jailhouse housed the first accused murderer in Champaign County, Bill Weaver, who escaped from the jail and fled to Wisconsin, where he supposedly lived an upstanding life after. The second courthouse was built in 1840 and was also a wood frame structure, which was also described as a temporary home for the courthouse. It was 40 feet by 20 feet and was only a single story. It featured 5 windows and was split into 3 rooms, with the largest used for trials in the community. It was in this courthouse that Abraham Lincoln first appeared as a lawyer while running the 8th Judicial Circuit. In 1848, the second courthouse was raised to make way for a more permanent brick building, seen here. Just as a note, this is also from the 1878 Encyclopedia of Champaign County, and as I stated, there you can see one of the early trolley cars that was active in our community, which was of course not electrified at the time and was simply horse-drawn. The courthouse was constructed by E.O. Smith of Decatur. It was 2 stories tall with a belfry atop it. The surrounding property remained unfenced, and locals noted a fair number of local animals pasturing on the property in its early days. Abraham Lincoln again served in this building and was in Urbana when he learned of the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He then gave a speech on the steps of the courthouse in opposition to the spread of slavery in the territories. It was also during this time that the county's second jail would open in 1856, and it was also made of brick and iron. It featured a sheriff's residence and was in use for nearly 50 years. In 1860, the courthouse saw an extensive remodel to reinforce the building with a steel frame and masonry exterior. The project was initiated by the county board, despite the growth west of the city in the newly incorporated city of Champaign, and called for the seat of the county and the courthouse to be transferred to it. In 1883, the Seth Thompson clock was installed in the bell tower with the advent of the National Standard Time. As you can see the clock here in the belfry just beneath the bell tower itself. At the beginning of the 20th century, the courthouse proved once again to be too small for the growing community, and so renowned local architect Joseph William Royer, who we'll be talking considerably about later in our talk, was commissioned to design the new grand home for the courthouse and jail in the county. The courthouse was completed in 1901 with an incredible 135-foot clock tower that looked out over the community. In 1905, it was also understood that the community needed a new, more secure jail, not just to keep people in, but to keep people out, as a result of numerous race riots in the state of Illinois in the early 1900s. The jail cost $42,000, more than 6 times its predecessor. It was made of brick, stone, and terracotta, and continued to house a sheriff's residence. The jail featured modern accommodations, including heating, lighting, and plumbing. It featured 26 cells, including a padded cell, a debtor's cell, and a dedicated section for women and children. It would be in use for over 70 years. But back at the courthouse, the clock tower has been subject to numerous reductions throughout its history, primarily due to damage caused by weather. In 1930, the clock tower was struck by lightning, leading to the loss of its spire. It was then struck again in 1952, and the belfry was removed, shortening the clock tower by 60 feet, which can be seen here at that exact height in this picture. After the opening of the 5th courthouse in 2001, however, county officials began work to restore the courthouse back to its former glory, reinstalling the Seth Thomas clock and rebuilding the tower to its initial design, which you can still see today. Just next door to the courthouse, where the parking garage sits today, was the site of the old Urbana City building. April 25th, 1893 was an especially cold and damp day. The University Military Band led a procession from the Masonic Temple on Main Street to the site of the new city building on the southwest corner of Broadway and Elm Streets. The band was followed by the Urbana mayor, city officers, and over 100 Masons from the local lodge and from lodges throughout the county. Grand Master Crawford from Jonesboro laid the cornerstone with a time capsule, and Mayor Brown Lee addressed the crowd. The building opened its doors a year later. However, only 2 years after the building opened, it was devastated by a gas explosion. City Clerk C.B. Holmes opened the vault door in the basement and lit a match, igniting leaking gas fumes that had been building up throughout the night, which destroyed doors and windows throughout the building and knocked plaster from the walls. Holmes was severely burned and bruised and was taken to the hospital and would survive his plight. The city building was then repaired and reopened shortly after. Early on in the city building's history, it became a meeting place for many local social organizations, including the Women's Christian Temperance Union and other temperance organizations. They often met to advocate to the city to adopt prohibition laws early on in the community's history and would be successful about 20 years before prohibition was enacted throughout the entire country in the early 1900s. It was also utilized for numerous other purposes, including the police and fire departments, whose garage laid just next to it, which you can see right here. There's the fire department, and then the police department had jail cells fitted underneath in the basement. The Urbana Library was also housed in the city building for a short period of time. However, it would eventually be moved when the newly constructed Urbana Free Library would be built in the early 1900s. One of the reasons why the Urbana Free Library was constructed was because of complaints by library patrons, because they could hear people sobering up in the holding cells underneath their feet. The city building remained in use until the mid-1960s, when the new city building would open on Vine Street and the Urbana City building was raised in 1966 to leave space for more parking in downtown Urbana. Much like the towering courthouse, another staple of Urbana stands just 2 blocks away, the historic Lincoln Hotel. In 1921, many Urbana business owners wanted to build a grand hotel for their community after seeing the success of hotels in Champaign like the Beardsley Hotel and the Inman. A group of 100 local businessmen formed the Urbana Hotel Corporation, chaired by Mayor Busey, and sold shares for $100 each. A total of $223,000 in stock was purchased by local Urbana citizens, but it was still shy of the $400,000 needed to build the new hotel. To continue, the organizers took out a $150,000 mortgage to begin construction. Also designed by Joseph William Royer, the hotel was created in a Tudor Revival style. He originally designed a more standard rectangular hotel, much like the Beardsley and Inman Hotel in downtown Champaign. However, the company leaders rejected it as they wanted a truly unique landmark for downtown Urbana. The hotel was built near the site of the Old Care Tavern, where Abraham Lincoln often stayed during his travels on the 8th Judicial Circuit. It was dedicated on Homecoming Day in 1923 to serve the growing University of Illinois and Urbana. This is a picture of it under construction in 1923. And there's the layout of the first floor. It featured 104 rooms, standing 5 stories tall with many amenities, including multiple dining rooms, a bar, a lounge, and an ornate lobby. The lower floors featured upscale, luxurious rooms that featured bathrooms, while the upper floors were more basic and featured communal restrooms. It opened successfully under the management of Charles H. Renner, who operated hotels for the Harvey restaurant chain along the Santa Fe line in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Charles was a renowned chef himself and was known for his hospitality managing the hotel. One of the main features of the hotel was its great hall, the Lincoln Room. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows, chandeliers, and room for over 100 guests with a rotating menu. Centered at the back of the room, which you can kind of see here in this early depiction, stood a grand fireplace with a painting of Lincoln sat atop the mantel. It was known as one of the most premier meeting spots and dining spots for the social and business elite in both Champaign-Urbana. Shortly after the hotel's opening, Lincoln the Lawyer, which was designed by Laredo Taft, was installed in front of the main entrance, which would be located on the, oh gosh, if I can get my directions correct, southeast side of the building. So where the Lincoln Square Mall is today, that's where the main entrance used to be. So Lincoln the Lawyer would be situated right here in this grassy lawn in front of the main entrance of the building. With this back half, that is the Grand Great Hall. Of course, with this picture, you see that there's, of course, not the Lincoln Square Mall there, nor the Jumers Edition, which would be built on the north side of the hotel. A couple of other staple landmarks, just to give you some reference. While we can't see the land where the Lincoln Square Mall was built, you can see the Urbana Independent Media Center, which was the Urbana Post Office, situated here, and then, of course, the courthouse and city building just to its north. The Great Depression hit the Lincoln Hotel hard, and in 1936 it declared bankruptcy. The hotel reopened under new management and would continue to struggle after World War II. In 1954, majority shareholders Gordon Kammerer and Charles M. Weber took full control of the hotel. A decade later, the hotel transferred ownership once again to Carson Peary Scott and Company department store chain after the opening of the Lincoln Square Mall in 1963. The hotel was then sold to James Juber in 2001, and it closed and passed through numerous hands, and unfortunately, it continued to kind of fall into a little bit of disrepair. One major addition, though, that James Juber added, though, while the hotel was still open, was the, of course, Jumer's Addition, which was situated on the north end of the building and was made to replicate the same Tudor-style historic look of the main hotel. It was eventually purchased by the Hotel Hilton chain in 2015, which painstakingly restored the hotel and reopened it in April 2025 as a part of their Tapestry collection of historic locations, and is open today. And if you haven't had the chance to go in and tour it, I would highly recommend you do so. The hotel was changed greatly, though, by the construction of Lincoln Square Mall. In 1959, JCPenney announced that they would be moving to downtown Champaign, leaving Montgomery Ward as Urbana's only department store. This concerned Manny Tepper, whose hardware store was next door to JCPenney's in downtown Urbana. The Urbana Association of Commerce then appointed Tepper, attorney Charlie Weber, and Lincoln Hotel manager Gordon Kammerer to go to New York City to woo JCPenney back to the community. However, they would not reconsider. On their way back, seeing nothing to lose, the committee stopped in Chicago to visit the headquarters of Carson Peary Scott to explore an opportunity. C. Virgil Martin explained that if a 10 to 12 block area of downtown Urbana could be cleared for Carson's to build a 100,000 square foot store, they might be interested in coming to the community. The committee then returned to Urbana with the news, and plans began by purchasing businesses and homes in the area. The final and biggest parcel of land needed being the Renner Funeral Home, which was a landmark of Urbana that had been standing in the community since the Civil War. Lincoln Square Mall was designed by renowned architect Victor Gruen and opened its doors on September 17, 1964, and was one of the first enclosed malls in the state of Illinois. Built as an extension to the 1923 Urbana Lincoln Hotel, the mall was originally planned as an outdoor pedestrian space before becoming a fully enclosed shopping center. Its pinwheel design featured 4 main entrances from the cardinal directions, making it somewhat unique compared to other traditional malls in the community. At the time, it was the largest construction project of its kind, spanning 9 city blocks, and was overseen by the Fuller Construction Company. The mall was constructed to counter planned developments in Champaign and the opening of Country Fair. The mall was just the first of a 4-part Urbana renewal plan that involved the widening of streets, the raising of buildings, and the construction of the 118,000 square foot interior space mall. 24 retailers opened their doors during the initial phase. The following phases were never completed and were meant to include the closure of Main Street between Race and Vine, expansion to include an additional big box retailer, and the construction of a civic center, theater, and high-rise office tower, which would certainly make what downtown Urbana looks like today vastly different. The South Corridor, known as High Court, was anchored by Carson's department store and quickly became the centerpiece of the mall. With its 2-story height and skylight stretching the full length of the space, the High Court was a popular gathering spot for banquets, events, and community functions. It continues to serve as a hub for public life in Urbana today, and was also a central feature of Bruin's vision. In addition to High Court, parking was also a part of Bruin's vision as well, and after meters were removed in 1978, visitors have enjoyed free parking ever since. The mall also featured some attractions, including 2 sculptures of a bear and whale that kids could climb on. The whale was eventually moved to Crystal Lake Park before being removed due to weather damage, and the bear was moved out of the mall around the same time and was supposedly moved to the Interlochen Music Camp in Traverse City, Michigan, where it supposedly stays there to this day. The mall was incredibly successful for a little over a decade, serving as the premier shopping center in Urbana until the Marketplace Shopping Center opened its doors. The larger retail spaces, parking lots, and interior spaces led businesses throughout the Champaign-Urbana area to move to the new location. Big box stores and retailers at Country Fair, the Lincoln Square Mall, and both downtown Urbana and Champaign moved, leaving these areas struggling. Mom and pop stores struggled to keep their life going at the mall, and the last original store at Lincoln Square, Fannie Mae, closed its doors in 2003. However, in recent years, the mall has revitalized itself somewhat with the reopening of the Lincoln Hotel, and with other businesses inhabiting its spaces, it still remains as a popular meeting spot in downtown Urbana. Just to give you an idea of what the planned construction would look like if that urban renewal plan had been finished, it would essentially mean that this entire area would have been closed off. These roads would have been closed. There would have been more space here where these parking lots have been located, and it would have eaten up most likely more area to the west as well. It would have been a very, very large plan. Let's now take a brief look at some of the historic churches in downtown Urbana, as religion was a very important part of the community's history, especially early on. Just next door to the Lincoln Hotel, of course, sits the oldest continuously operating church in Champaign County, the First Methodist Church of Urbana. The ornate Gothic Revival Church that sits on the lot today was not their first home, however. When the congregation first gathered in 1841, they met in a small brick-and-mortar church on the south side of Elm Street between Race and Broadway. However, it was short-lived and was sold 15 years later in 1856 and was converted into a stable. Unfortunately, no images of the First Methodist Church still exist. That same year, though, the church moved to its second church, being seen here on the Bowman map from 1858, and with a picture of it here, and was a stone and brick building and was constructed where the current church sits today at the intersection of Race and Green. Just a few years later, after it opened its doors, the original entrance and spire were moved and were placed on the Race Street side of the building, which can be seen here. Originally, the entrance was located on the opposite side. Like many of the other churches in Champaign County, this church also proved to be too small to accommodate the growing congregation. And so a new large brick church was built in 1893, which can be seen here on the left. It was in this church that many of its organizations first took root, including the Ladies' Aid Society, the church's Juniors Women's League, and the local chapter of the Methodist Brotherhood. These organizations held events and fundraisers not only for the church, but for many local charitable organizations like the Cunningham Deaconess Home. The congregation lived in this church for around 30 years, but once again, it needed room to grow. So in 1926, the church commissioned architect W.W. Maxwell to design the grand Gothic-style church that sits on the lot today. The following year, while construction was underway, fundraising continued. Lydia Marriott, a longtime congregation member, left $22,000 in her will to the church, with $15,000 given to the building fund, with the remaining 7,000 given to the church's societies to continue their charitable work. The church still holds services today, but also shares the space with a Korean congregation as well, the Christ Community Church at the Square. Just down the road on Green Street is the historic Unitarian Universalist Church, which was organized in Urbana in 1859. They did not have a physical location at that moment and met in other buildings in downtown Urbana and on the courthouse lawn during good weather. After the Civil War, the congregation raised enough money to purchase a lot on the corner of Green and Birch Streets for $450. Their first church, constructed in 1871, was made of brick. More than 500 people attended the dedication of this new building, and the church served the congregation until 1913, when it was raised to construct a larger church on the lot, which is the one that is seen here in this picture. The entry was moved from Green Street to a side entrance beneath the new bell tower. More seating was added, and a kitchen was built in the basement. The cornerstone of the original building can still be found in the basement of the church today. This new church was built on the same brick foundation as the first, and this is a later picture of it, right here. As the first, it was designed by Joseph William Royer in an English Gothic revival style. The new church was celebrated with a procession of over 1,000 members of the Knights of Pythias from their lodge in downtown Urbana to the church site to lay the new cornerstone. Congressman Lawrence Stringer addressed the crowd for the opening in 1914. The Universalist Church then merged with the Unitarian Church on campus in 1957. The merger led to increasingly crowded conditions for both congregations, and so plans were made to have an addition built to the Green Street Church in 1964, and it was completed later that year. It featured classroom spaces, children's room, and an outdoor and covered play space underneath the building itself. And there's a picture of the church today, with the main entrance now being located here on Birch Street. The last church we'll discuss is the All Souls Presbyterian Church on Illinois Street, but it was originally the home of the Urbana Baptist Church. The Baptists began meeting in 1838, meeting at the Brumley Schoolhouse east of Urbana and at other buildings in downtown, much like the Universalists did before their church was constructed. In 1850, the congregation organized a building committee that included John White, William Gill, D.O. Brumley, and Matthew and James Busey. They successfully raised funds for their first home built in 1856, which is seen here in this picture. The ladies of the church and the Urbana Sewing Society helped raise money to purchase a bell to place in the church's bell tower. The church, with bell in tower, was dedicated on January 3rd, 1856, with a reverend from Bloomington leading the service, and successfully advocated for community members to pick up the remaining $1,134 of unpaid bills from the church's construction. The congregation used this church for 41 years, but in 1895, the congregation of over 400 had outgrown this church. And so, plans were quickly arranged, and fundraising began with members of the congregation donating over $5,000 to the project in less than a month. Stanford Hall, a recent graduate from the University of Illinois, was selected as the architect and later superintendent of the building. It was designed in a German Romanesque style in brick and stone. The windows featured the names of members of the congregation scattered throughout its halls. The dedication ceremony occurred on May 29, 1896, with President Draper of the university addressing the crowd, and over 1,250 people crowding into the church for sermons by Reverend Myron Haynes of Chicago. Through the Baptist Church's history, it has been intrinsically tied to the University of Illinois. Many members of its congregation went on to found their own members of the Baptist Church throughout the community, including the Centennial Church, the Herald of Hope Baptist Church, and a small church on Cunningham Avenue. The congregation eventually left its historic home in the 2000s, and the church was then used by a Korean congregation until 2019, when Megan Gillette and Kyle Harrison began plans to repurpose the aging church into an events and studio space. However, COVID-19 led these plans to falter, and the All Souls Presbyterian Church moved into the building shortly after and remains there today. That's a picture of what the interior of the church looks like today, as well as one of their current congregations. But what about entertainment for the citizens of the community? Aside from the fairgrounds and parks established early in the community's history, theaters and opera halls were prominent hubs for movies and performances. Before the Princess Theater came to be, Busey's Block was constructed in 1870. This large brick building was one of the only structures to survive the Great Fire of October 1871, the same day as the Great Chicago Fire that took out over 30 buildings in downtown Urbana. Busey's Block featured numerous businesses, including Busey Brothers Bank, Hatfield Mitchell and Company Dry Goods and Flour Dealers. The Gazette Job Printing Office was the only occupant on the second floor, and the Gazette's bindery room occupied the remainder. Busey's was one of Urbana's two early opera halls, across from the Tiernan's Hall, which we'll discuss next. Busey's Hall was located on the upper floor, very top, and you can even see Busey's Hall emblazoned on one of their signs there, and was used for socials, dances, dinners, and theater productions and lectures. At one point, when roller skating was popular, Busey's Hall was used as a skating rink for a short period of time. In 1898, W.I. Sappel and Company department store took over the entire building. 5 years later, Sappel's moved out, and Gus Freeman, a former Big Four Railroad employee, and his wife, Alice Busey, remodeled the building, turning the top floor back into a dance hall. In 1914, Gus began work to convert 2 of the 3 ground floor storefronts into the Princess Theater, which was a different space from Busey's Hall. Perry made sure I made note of that. It was described as one of the prettiest photo playhouses in East Central Illinois. The front of the Princess at ground level was decorated with white enameled brick and columns. The entrance was centered on both storefronts with small business spaces on either side, and the name of the theater was inlaid in mosaic tile of the lobby floor near the entrance and can still be seen today if you walk by the theater. The Princess opened its doors on January 25, 1915, with a program of moving pictures that was changed daily. Beckwith's orchestra furnished the music. The Alger brothers then purchased the Alger? Sure, thank you, Barry. Purchased the Princess in 1934 and spent $12,000 on remodeling that changed the style of the building from Italianate to Art Deco. Some of the Italianate windows can still be seen from the alley on the east side of the building. A new facade of white enameled brick and black chevrons was installed, covering the front windows of the Opera House. Under their ownership, the current marquee, which you can see here, was installed. The theater reopened with Fog Over Frisco starring Bette David in 1967. Carasotis Theaters came to Urbana, Champaign, and on October 1958 purchased some of the Alger-owned theaters, including the Princess. They gave the theater a new name in 1967, the Cinema Theater. In 1985, Carasotis converted the adjoining storefront into a second auditorium, seating 230 people. The Cinema Theater closed its doors on November 10, 1994. The last films shown were Ed Wood and Red Rock West. In the following year, Norman and Carolyn Baxley bought the building, remodeling the second auditorium back into a storefront and converting the theater and lobby into retail space, now the Cinema Gallery. The auditorium space was turned into open offices with an entrance off of Goose Alley. The old Opera House space, located on the top floor, was turned into a dance studio and had been unused during the Carasotis years. It was cleaned, painted, and the HVAC ductwork for the theater below was removed. It was left as a huge open room and was first used as a martial arts studio and is now, of course, a dance studio. Across the street from the Cinema Gallery is Urbana's other old opera hall, Tiernan's Block, also the home of Crane Alley and now Encanto. Built by Francis Tiernan and designed by William McWilliams, the first floor with 16-foot high ceilings was evenly divided into 2 storefronts, F. Tiernan and Brother Grocers and A. O. Clapp and Company Druggists. The second story with 14-foot ceilings housed offices, and the third story with 18-foot ceilings housed the Opera Hall. While the building opened in December 1871, the Opera Hall didn't open until October the following year. It could hold up to 900 people with a stage 24 by 18 feet and featured 2 drop curtains and 12 pieces of scenery, and was lit with gas foot and border lights. The Opera Hall was short-lived compared to its competition on the other side of the street and closed its doors in 1887 when the Urbana Masons purchased the building to serve as their new lodge. A fire next door at the St. Nicholas Hotel on February 3, 1893 spread to the lodge rooms, destroying all of its fixtures. The lodge room was then redone and reopened. In 1941, the Masons spent $40,000 on a Joseph William Royer designed remodel that extended the building to the south and added a new terracotta facade. The lodge spaces on the upper floors were completely rebuilt. In 1978, the Masons moved out and sold the building to Ray Tampone. In 1997, Norman and Carolyn Baxley bought the building and remodeled the old lodge space. Some of the tenants over the years have included attorneys, City of Urbana offices, Amesbury Grocery, Lori's Favorite Sports Shop, J.C. Penney's, Crane Alley, and today's Encanto. The last theater we'll discuss no longer stands, and is the old Illinois Theater, which was destroyed by fire some 100 years ago. The Illinois sat behind the old Flatiron building in Urbana on Springfield Avenue, around where the World Harvest International Market is located today. Interest in a grand opera hall in downtown Urbana began in the mid-1890s. Busey's Hall had been serving its community for over 20 years, and by that point was considered too small for first-class companies. Community members interested in the project began to meet and discuss their plans. There were 4 sites under discussion for the proposed opera house, 2 on Market Street, now Broadway, 1 on Main Street, and the last on Race. By 1898, Busey's Hall had closed, and increased interest led to more fundraising for the project. By 1906, it seemed inevitable that a new opera house would open in downtown Urbana. The Illinois Theater Company was incorporated a year later, with $34,000 of stock sold out of the $40,000 needed to start construction. It began shortly after, and Joseph William Royer was brought on as its architect. The theater was built with over 1.2 million bricks, and it opened its doors on March 3rd, 1908. Over $5,000 worth of tickets were sold in advance to help support the building's cost. The theater was managed locally before being subleased to the Comstock Amusement Company of New York in 1910. But management struggles would continue, and a lawsuit against the Comstock Amusement Company led the Illinois to break away from its ownership. The theater board was dissatisfied with the way that the Comstock Amusement Company had been managing the theater, and so the board assumed local management and joined the vaudeville circuit in 1912. In addition, the theater began to host a variety of sports and road shows to bring in more revenue. The earliest wrestling match was held on September 2nd, 1915, with many more being held through the following years until 1925. In January 1923, the local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan held a meeting at the theater with over 1,000 in attendance. Later that year, the Zenith Amusement Company, who were affiliated with the Klan, purchased the theater. The first major Klan event then occurred before the end of 1923, with musical performances, a dinner for the Imperial Wizard from the national headquarters, and a Klan wedding. On Sunday, April 3rd, 1927, the Illinois Theater was destroyed by fire. I'll show a picture of that next, but this is just what the interior of the Illinois Theater looked like when it was still open and, of course, standing. The fire department determined that nothing could be done to save the theater when they arrived, and so prevented neighboring buildings from catching fire. The Zenith Amusement Company secretary, J.J. Reynolds, who was also the exalted Cyclops for the Champaign County Klan, claimed that it might have been arson, but a cause for the fire would never be found, and the Klan looked to start a new home, but it never came to fruition. The theater was then torn down, Tuscan apartments were built on the lot in 1930, and a newer apartment and office building sits on the lot today. I've mentioned Joseph William Royer a few times already in today's presentation as one of the most prominent architects in our community. We'll end today's presentation by examining just a few more of his buildings in downtown Urbana. But before that, let's take just a short look at the mind behind the brick and stone. Royer was born in 1873 right here in Urbana as the youngest of 3 children. He received his education locally at Urbana High School and went on to attend the University of Illinois, studying under another renowned architect, Nathan Clifford Ricker. Royer received his degree in architecture in 1895. Afterwards, he became an engineer for the city of Urbana before opening his own firm in 1904. He would design numerous buildings throughout Champaign County, 74 to be exact, out of the 115 structures that he designed. Royer then retired in the early 1950s, and he passed 2 months after his wife in November 1954. Aside from the buildings we'll discuss next, Royer also designed the Urbana Free Library, Leal School, and Carle Hospital. Tracing the history of the city of Urbana is truly like tracing Royer's legacy, which still exists and stands today. In 1871, the Clapp and Maxwell drugstore opened on the southeast corner of Main and Race Streets. By the time Everett Milton became an employee in 1877, the drugstore had been purchased by B.H. Cushman and renamed the Corner Drugstore. After working there for 7 years, Knowlton bought the business in 1884 and added paint and school supplies to the merchandise. 2 years later, Knowlton's brother-in-law, George N. Bennett, who graduated from the National School of Pharmacy, was licensed by the Illinois State Board of Pharmacy, and was a member of the State Pharmaceutical Association, became his business partner. The store again expanded its offerings to include books and textbooks used in local schools and at the University of Illinois. After Knowlton's death in 1924, George became the sole owner of the business. A year later, a new building was commissioned at the site, designed by Joseph William Royer in a Gothic Revival style with Art Deco influences. The Knowlton and Bennett drugstore then reopened the following year in 1926, with the Urbana Daily Courier referring to the building as Urbana's most beautiful business. George continued to run his drugstore until his death in 1935, and Knowlton's daughter Miriam Knowlton Corey and his son-in-law, Lester Corey, took up the family business. They remained open until they retired in 1971, ending the family's business at 100 years old. The building was then sold to the Maloney and Davis Attorney's Office in 1977, and it also housed the Champaign County Republican Party offices on the second floor. In 2013, Milia Hayes and Lori Young opened their apparel and home furnishings boutique, Bohemia, and still resides in the building today. And if you drive by it, it has changed incredibly little throughout its history, and still features the awnings that you can see in its historic imageries. Nathan Cohen was born in Philadelphia in February 1850, eventually ending up in Cincinnati, where he learned the craft of rolling cigars. Before he entered into business, Cohen befriended members of Hooley's Minstrels in Chicago, appearing with them in stage productions in the city. He then moved to California in the 1870s, where he joined the Marston Theater Company, touring California and Nevada. He then returned to Illinois, settling in Champaign, entering into business with Samuel Epstein, owner of a cigar factory. In 1878, Cohen opened his own cigar factory in a wood-framed building at the corner of Race and Main, where the current building that you see here stands today. After purchasing the building in 1902, he renamed it to the Cohen Block. Nat's son, Sidney, joined the business in 1906 and was subsequently renamed Nat Cohen and Son. Here's a picture of the Cohen family here. Just 1 year later, Cohen razed the wood frame building to build a new grand home for his business. Joseph William Royer also designed this iconic building, and Cohen's Cigar Factory reopened the following year. Cohen's business office was located on the first floor with a separate entrance facing Race Street, and the cigar factory inhabited the second floor alongside the United States Insurance Company and a dentist's office. The first floor hosted the Urbana Baking Company, the Parlor Barbershop, and the Vreiner and Vacky Ice Cream and Candy Store, which you can see in the picture for Vreiner's soda and candy right here. The cigar factory remained open until Nat's eventual retirement in 1913, and the rooms were renovated into additional offices. The Cohen Building has hosted many different businesses and offices over the years. By 1952, Henry Green's law offices inhabited the entire second floor, and Harry and Pettibon's barbershop was on the main floor. A major remodel came that same decade, including a new reception room, a decorated library, vaults, an elevator and stairs, and in 1976, the building held law offices, a guitar shop, and the Stevens floor and wall covering store. While the first level has changed over the years, the building still holds many of its historic features, including the original antique Banks vault, which still stands in the West Room, and the East Room still hosts the mosaic tile floor and custom tin ceiling tiles from the candy shop. The last building, which we've got just a few more minutes to talk about, does not stand today and is the historic Flatiron of Urbana, and was an iconic structure in Urbana's early history. Another Royer building, which was commissioned by the Flatiron Improvement Association and was constructed in 1906, the New York Flatiron that Royer took inspiration from was 22 stories high. The Urbana Flatiron was only 4 stories, but it was still the tallest building in downtown Urbana at the time. Construction was not without its challenges, though, beginning with the charge that the building encroached on city property. The location required that a part of the Boneyard Creek had to be rerouted, and there were further issues with settling the foundation on good, solid ground. Eventually, a retaining wall was built on the Main Street side of the building, but it too suffered a partial collapse during the initial construction. The Urbana Flatiron eventually opened its doors in September 1906, housing a variety of businesses including the Flatiron Department Store, which can be seen here on the right, Royer's Architectural Office, multiple law offices, and the home of the Elks Lodge, which now occupied the entire 4th floor. The Women's Christian Temperance Union had a fountain installed depicting longtime temperance advocate and leader Frances Willard in front of the Flatiron. In addition to honoring their leader, the bottom of the statue, which can be seen here, served as a drinking fountain and was meant to be a symbol of temperance. A 1930 news article claimed, though, that people were using the fountain as a refrigerator for their alcohol. Eventually, during renovations to Main Street in Springfield, the statue was relocated to a storeroom at Crystal Lake Park before being melted down during World War II. The Flatiron stood for over 40 years as a staple of downtown Urbana until March 11, 1948, when a devastating fire destroyed it. Losses were estimated at over $400,000. The Elks Lodge owned the building at the time, and aside from the loss of the building, records from Royer's architectural firm, they also lost the law library of Harry Green and Associates, which is why they moved to the Cohen building shortly after. Though interesting thing, that's the remnants of the Flatiron building, but the building behind it still stands today and is recognizable at that intersection. It is now Kirby's Service Center, and has historically been a garage, automobile shop, and gas station since its construction in the 1920s. When it first opened, it took its name from the historic building to its west as the Flat Tire Company. Ironic, right? Its longtime ownership by the Kirby family began in 1946, when Mike Kirby purchased the building. Thankfully, during the devastating fire at the Flatiron building, the snowfall earlier that day helped to protect the building with no damage, only aside from its roof. And that's only a small piece of Urbana's historic history, but I would be happy to answer questions with the remaining time that we have.